What's up everyone, welcome to today's video, welcome to the Video Game Fight School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. So for those of you who may or may not know, one of the really cool things about this channel is almost under every video, you're going to find a pocket of arguments going on, and from time to time, I like to throw myself into some of these because I like to learn stuff. I really want to hear what here in the community we're talking about and kind of see how I can add some input as to some of the knowledge that I have, or more importantly, gain some knowledge surrounding some situations. So just recently, one of our audience members mentioned something regarding Marvel Spider-Man being the highest selling game and has dethroned the Arkham games in terms of sales. Now, before we got to that conclusion, though, it was a matter of maybe having to refine that particular claim into that rather than saying that Spider-Man dethroned Arkham as a whole. Now, this argument is more for just informational purposes. There's no need for anybody to get heated. I actually do enjoy engaging in these and looking around data. So one of the very first things that, we did in this particular conversation was we looked up Metacritic scores, and it appears that Arkham City is actually slightly higher in its user score than Marvel's Spider-Man. And with Marvel's Spider-Man, it's kind of easy to look at it because you can actually see everything on one platform, which was a PlayStation 4 at the time of release. In regard to, say, Arkham City, you had to look through the different platforms, but I think it was on a PlayStation platform that it edged out Marvel's Spider-Man by 0.1. Now, this is not a significant difference, but it still goes to show that Arkham City was a solid game and was actually well received. And the reason I actually am mentioning Arkham City in this conversation is also because Arkham City used to hold the record for one of the highest sold comic superhero games that had ever been in place until Marvel Spider-Man knocked it away from there. And so this particular metric was actually very good to look at. But then there was something that I had to actually put into consideration, which is another factor that I felt really gave Spider-Man the explosive edge, not just necessarily giving it over a little bit of the edge in terms of sales, but basically allowing it for it to nuke everything. And this particular edge, we're going to look at how Gotham Knights can maybe leverage this, or if they're not leveraging it, risk actually having their sales not meet up to potential expectations. And this could be really costly on the long run. Now, what is this edge? The edge is quite simple, and I know some of you are expecting me to say the rating. One was rated M, one was rated teen. I did use that argument, but that's not necessarily the factor that we'll consider in this video. But the factor is itself marketing. Now, for those of you who've been following Gotham Knights, you know that the marketing had been the very biggest complaint that we had more than anything else. If you go back and look through the catalogs of videos that have been made for the past few years, you'll notice that even things like maybe combat, maybe even the character designs and models, yes, there were complaints about that in the early reveals, but the marketing was the biggest one a lot of people could not wrap their minds around. It felt like things were haphazard. First we get a t-shirt, then we get a little puzzle, then we get some website, then we get some random stuff, and stuff just did not seem to be cohesive. And I think this really did have an effect on the game because it did not necessarily set a tone as to when the game was going to be released and what people should expect. Now, it seems like the marketing team is on point and starting to get things together, but I think if they're going to actually achieve even a third of the sales of maybe say Marvel Spider-Man, they really have to step up their game, or hopefully they have things planned that will probably be able to broadcast the message of this game to audiences out there. Another reason I actually did look at this was another audience member of mine threw out the question just today, and they asked me and said, do you think Gotham Knights is going to sell about 5 million copies? And I replied quickly and I said, I don't know if it's going to be able to sell whatever many copies, but if they plaster this game in front of every gas station, grocery store, in any Super Bowl ad, or whatever it is they want to do, then the game might not necessarily find it too hard to reach the 10 million mark, because marketing is a very powerful force in video games. And this is something we're going to look at from the perspective of the comic superhero games. So let's go back to Marvel Spider-Man's marketing. In fact, one very interesting thing about Marvel Spider-Man is many of us are quite surprised by the amount of success that game got. But once you go back and start looking at how Insomniac and Sony marketed this game, it would not surprise you anymore. Because number one, I can say with all of what they did, if we go back and look at the way they actually set it up, they pretty much spared no expense. In fact, there were two things that they did that I believe really did shake up this entire video game's success to make it reach where it was. In this video, we're going to point them out. The very first thing that they did was they plastered the image of this particular game and the Spider-Man in this game across all of the subways in New York City. Now, anyone knows that New York is the home of Spider-Man, and not just New York, but New York City. And that, in my opinion, was probably one of the most ingenious organic marketing campaigns that you could actually run. A Spider-Man game is coming to the PlayStation 4, and everyone in New York can basically in their heads hear Spider-Man saying with his New York accent, I'm swinging it, or whatever the heck it is Andrew Garfield did in that movie. And I think it might have compelled a lot more people who were residents of the city at that time to take a look at the game. New York is a city of about 8 million people strong, maybe even more at this time. And so I strongly believe that that exposure by itself would have at least boosted the sales closer to the double digits than, say, all of the other campaigns that had been going on from E3 and even other media that they had used. Now, guess what? Gotham Knights is being set in this Gotham City, and we know that Gotham City is also New York. It is just a retelling of the region. In fact, in sales in corporate America, they would refer to the New York City area as Gotham region. This is crazy. I used to work in a company where one time we were looking at paperwork and they said the Gotham area. And I said, what is that? Is that like Batman's area? And all my bosses laughed at me and said, no, this is the New York City region as part of our data that we're collecting. But so far, so good. It doesn't seem like there's any organic marketing that's being done to appeal to a Gotham City that is going to be represented in this particular Batman or Bat Family game. Now, I'm not saying that they have to do it, don't get me wrong, but it appears that a lot of the marketing, they are taking a local approach by doing the different murals in the Montreal area. This is fine, this is good, but there's nothing that can beat that organic exposure like if you were to do it here in good old USA where Batman is from. I believe if the developers or the marketing team are able to get their hands on, say, maybe even a Times Square billboard ad, it will more than likely help a little bit to push this game forward in terms of sales. Now, the second thing that was done with Marvel's Spider-Man that I felt was probably what tipped it over the edge for its extreme number of sales was the Super Bowl ad spend that was actually put forward for this particular game. In fact, one of the executives at Sony is cited as saying that he doesn't remember when Sony had ever spent that much money on an ad spend for any IP. Do you know what this was? This was a 90-second ad for Spider-Man that was actually dropped, I think, a very short time before the game was released. Usually, Super Bowl ads are in the 30-second time slots. Sony spent money on 3 of these time slots. Ladies and gentlemen, one Super Bowl time slot has always kind of varied within the millions, somewhere around 5 million to 2022 numbers, which are reaching around $7 million for 30 seconds of your ad. Imagine spending 3 times that much on just one ad to put this game in front of everyone. Now, keep in mind that if that ad spend costs them somewhere around 10 to 15 million, it already outpaces all of the spending that Arkham City actually used for its marketing. For those who may or may not know, it is reported that Batman Arkham City's marketing budget was around $10 million. So seeing how Batman Arkham City was still a successful game, even on such a minimal budget, to me speaks volumes that Warner Brothers probably could have done a lot more. And if at any rate they had doubled their ad spend or even increased it by 50% for marketing, Arkham City would have been in a position that would have been really, really hard to actually just blow out of the water by Marvel's Spider-Man. But Sony, already understanding that their investment in Insomniac, that they paid basically $229 million to acquire the studio, and even all of the other things by also sharing profits with Marvel, they understood that they needed to knock this out of the park. And this is where sometimes the complacency, or maybe I shouldn't call it complacency, but the extreme comfort of Warner Brothers sometimes shoots them in the foot because they own these IPs fundamentally, and they don't necessarily seem like they need to do too much. They just feel every time the fans are supposed to just grovel and come over and buy their products. But ladies and gentlemen, the landscape has changed for gaming. I could provide other examples of how marketing budgets have basically taken video games from, say, maybe nice, wonderful sales to phenomenal sales, like the case of Destiny, where Activision dropped tons of millions of dollars for its marketing, thereby seeing its sales pretty much blow everything out of the water. Or even if you take a look at Call of Duty, you will realize that it is a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign to release any Call of Duty game. So Gotham Knights and the Warner Brothers marketing team ought to modify their strategy because, yes, they do have time for the marketing to go out. It is right now August. The game comes out in October. So even this 1 month of IGN exposure and all of the above going on is already good for informational purposes. I believe that the month of September ought to be the month of pretty much plaster it everywhere. And just like the Spider-Man game, which had its face plastered everywhere, if Gotham Knights can even do something of that sort, we'll be able to have some respectable sales numbers down the road. But these are just ideas, and these are just some of the numbers that I've gotten from research and something that just actually adds a little bit more to the conversations that we've been having. So for those of our audience members that continue to say that Spider-Man is such a great game that has sold so much money, you have to remember that Spider-Man had a marketing budget of a whale, while Arkham City pretty much had the marketing budget of a shark. When you look at that comparison, then I think the sales numbers really do speak to that effect. But we can't necessarily always give it a one-to-one comparison, because then again, both games were released in different times. As of the time that Arkham City was coming out, social media campaigns were not necessarily as strong as when Marvel Spider-Man was coming out. But it is nice to analyze all of this, because this has given me a very clear indication as to some of the power of marketing in video games, and looking at the way and probably examining in more detail how Warner Brothers Games Montreal is marketing Gotham Knights. Whatever we see from Gotham Knights numbers will be largely dependent on many factors, and one of them being marketing. So thanks for watching the video. I really appreciate you guys for taking the time to listen to this. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section, and hopefully we'll talk very soon. Peace out.